that last course is profoundly true. The things of the earth grow strangely dim, and then there's another sense in which the things of the earth grow strangely clear. Landscapes, the visible landscape, is God's creation. It's good. And we need to see it for what it is, but we can only do that if we have got it positioned well within the other landscape. Now, last evening, or at some point, there was a discussion about the cross in Calvin. And so I went back and studied especially the section on patience and cross-bearing. And there really is a troublesome ambiguity in this. His main theme is the cross. And the cross is not a difficulty. But then he talks about different crosses for different people. And on page 55 of the little booklet, he's talking about why people have different experiences, and some are afflicted in ways that others are not. And he says the reason why we see different persons disciplined with different crosses. The heavenly physician takes care of the well-being of all his patients. He gives some a milder medicine and purifies others by more shocking treatments. But he omits no one, for the whole world without exception is ill. So now, all you have to do is go back and read all that he's saying, and you'll see that when he talks about taking the cross, he is talking about something that is the same for everyone, right? The cross is the same for everyone. And the cross is laying aside your will in favor of the will of God. That is the cross. That's the one that you have to take, or you can't be his disciple. Right? And in the hymns, the cross of glory towering over the wrecks of time. That isn't your particular flat tire. So you have to be careful with him. And also you have to be careful, I think, perhaps beyond his real intentions, because he sometimes talks as if the bad things that happen to you are directly brought upon you by God. And in his zeal to do justice to God's sovereignty, he tends to underestimate and not sufficiently give importance to what in theology we call secondary causes. And you wind up having him the doer of the evil deeds that cause you difficulties. So those two things, and thanks to our friend over here who takes our picture. And I'm sorry, I'm so bad on names, but which? Aaron, okay. Aaron, thank you, Aaron. It was a good point, and I'm sure it was something that everyone is feeling. The sovereignty of God does not come in the form of inflicting evil actions and bad things on people. Right. It comes in his capacity to bring things out for good no matter what happens. That is how the sovereignty of God relates to the difficult things that turn out to be crosses in the plural, as he and other people use that. So I just urge you, don't confuse the cross with the crosses. Now, I want to talk more about this, I think, in the morning. I'd like to sort of systematically go through this book, so if you think to bring it with you, do that. Someone made copies of the little prayer that I put up at the end of the last session, and I think it's a great idea, and really you might want to think of how you would word this for today and make a plaque and put it up on your wall. Right? It would be a good exercise. And we are, just to keep our continuity, we came up to discipleship and disciplines. And we still have a little work to do on that. We'll try to finish that this morning. And then I want to hand this out now because I may get to it before lunch. Who knows? And if you just make sure everyone has a copy of that, it is a transparency, and I just decided it would be too hard for you to get it off of this. There's too much information on it, and I really want you to have it. Because now, when we get done with disciplines, I want to talk about the Sermon on the Mount. Because if you're going to teach people to do what Jesus said, right in the middle of the road in front of you is the Sermon on the Mount. And you have to figure out what to do with it. So we want to be sure and spend time on that. And then after doing that, I will want to take some time with a particular thing that Jesus said and talk to you in detail about how I would teach someone to do that. And then the final move will be trying to transfer all of this to our congregations. And there are quite difficult things to be dealt with there. I won't deal with all of them, but just talk to you about how you might go about it, if it struck you that it would be a good idea. And then we'll see whatever else we're able to manage. But that's the deal. Now, we've talked about this and alluded to it, but it's too important to run the risk of you not getting it clearly. This is in chapter 5 of Renovation. Now, we've talked about this, but it's too important, and I want to just spend a very brief moment on it. Because this is a scheme that is built into human nature, and God has provided for human life in general, not just with spiritual things. If you would like to be a millionaire in 5 years, you need a vision of what that is and why it's a good thing. If you would like to lose 25 pounds, same thing is true. And if you have a vision that is right, to put it simply, then you can form an intention. If you don't have a vision, your intention will be weak and wobbly at best, and it will not be clear what it is an intention of. And as a result, you'll not be able to implement it, and that will show up in your not utilizing the means to do it. And in many cases, socially especially, we have all kinds of means but no vision. That's the general truth about education in this country. We've got, at USC, we have one floor of a big building with all kinds of equipment for language learning. Almost no one who goes through that university comes out proficient in any language other than English, and sometimes not that. And people all over the world learn to speak English better than a lot of us do, with nothing but vision and intention. And a few means gathered here and there, they learn it. And so the same thing is true of our churches often. I've already said to you once, and some things I'd like to say to you over and over, and one of them is the church always does best when it has the least. That's historically true. And it's true because as means proliferate, vision and intention diminish. Why is that? Because you start taking care of the means. You invest in them, you give your attention, you give your time to it, and suddenly you are a caretaker of some institution that doesn't know why it exists. So now our vision, what is it for following Christ and learning to do the things that he did? It is the vision of the kingdom of God and your life in it. That's the fundamental thing. That's why we start where we do. Then in that, character goals. What kind of a person was Jesus? What's your vision? What would your life be like, for example, if you actually exhibited the things that you see in the Sermon on the Mount? What would that look like? That's your vision. And then power, because as Paul says in 1 Corinthians, the kingdom of God is not in words, it is in power. And power is, of course, the capacity to accomplish things. The kingdom is the kingdom of God, and there's power. So our vision would be a vision of a life in which there was a power flowing that is of God. And then the intention, now this is, think of it like this. This is where you're preaching the gospel. This is where you're calling people to commitment. This is gospel evangelism tied to discipleship. You might like the phrase, discipleship evangelism. That is evangelism specifically for the purpose of making disciples. And that's where the intention. So when someone, as we would say today, when someone gets saved, what was their intention? Now see, that's going to hinge on what this is. And it is a real good question, a very troubling and dangerous question to ask. When people get saved, what do they intend? And in many cases, they intend to join the church. That's not a bad thing, but you have to ask, now what is that going to do for you? And you realize that if that is the intention, then the vision underlying it may be rather weak. And it may be that the vision is getting saved and staying saved in the sense of being acceptable to God minimally because you're forgiven. Now, I was raised Southern Baptist, and one of the things that they ask you to do when you joined the church was promise that when you moved, you would move your letter, as they call it. And that meant you would go to a Baptist church and you would say, I'm transferring my membership from that church to this one, if you will have me. And they would ask you questions like how you were baptized and so forth, and maybe probably take you in, and then you'd make that same promise to that church. So I just use that as an illustration. What is the intention that lies in the mind and spirit of the person who becomes a church member? I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I really want you to think about it, because all this stuff we're doing is if you can use it, if you can do something with it. Now then, if you have come through this in a certain way that I've been trying to suggest to you, become a disciple, and your vision includes life in the kingdom of God, character goals, power, you'll need some means. And this is where the vision and intention do the selecting. Because when you start selecting means, you're going to do it in the light of your vision and your intention. And that is why some people don't select any means, except perhaps sort of the standard advice that they might get from those around them. And it would be a good exercise for each of us to list those. Now, very interesting, because of the real ramshackle condition of all of this. Ramshackle is a theological term. You see many local groups that no longer do membership. Now that's really something to think about. And I'm not coming out for it or against it, but it's, you know, this is happening. You may be actually at our little group there in Reseda. We don't do membership. And there are various ways of thinking about that in ordered sets and all kinds of things, that you open and close sets. And you probably, since you are students and in this period, you have heard about that. But you want to think about now, what's the meaning of that move? And that is associated. See, not long ago, people would have said, well, look, if you're serious about being a Christian, you better join a church. And let me say, there's something to that. How you spell it out, I'd rather not do it in the ways that it was often done, but there's something to that. I mean, we're in real trouble on ecclesiology. I mean real trouble. And that is one of the incoherence in ecclesiology is one of the things that is most troubling for those of us who are trying to do the work of the Lord. And also it is one of the things that makes a constant stream of people going up, 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 higher church, higher church, higher church. Because what they're doing is, in part, responding to the kind of vacuum. And they wind up joining churches that they don't believe what they teach, but they feel like there's a real substance there. And so it's very interesting how this works. Now, for our means, what we're talking about, realizing the vision, is spiritual disciplines effectively implemented. Now, I put up the triangle because I want us all to understand that spiritual disciplines are not enough. They are part of a picture. And I have these diagrams, and you kind of have to overlap them and put them in with the golden triangle. And See what sense you can make of it. They do fit up, and it's a good challenge to do that for you individually. And I don't mean to get it right according to me, but think out those issues so that you can act on them, and you can teach, and you can lead in terms of something that makes sense for spiritual growth, or if you like, spiritual formation. Now, one of the things that I was dwelling on last time was where is the place of discipleship? And I said the place of discipleship is everywhere you are. Okay? But undoubtedly, the main place of discipleship is where you work. Okay? And for a very simple reason, two simple reasons. One is you spend most of your time there. Right? And if you don't do discipleship there, you are relegating most of your active life outside the range of discipleship and learning to follow Christ and experiencing the kingdom of God. So now we're back to Job, otherwise known as Job. And it's very important to put that in place. Your job is not your life. So I have to add that, and I wish I had time to talk more about that. We'll see what's left tomorrow. But your job is not your life. But it is the place you spend most of your time. And that's why you want to understand that the place of discipleship is mainly there. Well, what's the church about? The church is about helping you understand how to do that. It isn't about finding something religious for you to do when you're not working. Now, the other reason, not just your time, but the other reason is that's where you are reigning. You reign at your job. And you may have some serious doubt about that. And that becomes a real problem because there's some other people reigning around you and over you maybe and under you. But if you get that idea of reigning, you get it right now in kingdom terms, you're going to have something that will enable you to transform your job. And if you got a bad job, the best way to get out of it is to do a good job with the one you got. And if we are faithful where we are, the Lord will promote us. And according to His wisdom and not our wisdom, where we're just trying to get out of something bad. And so the old deal about from the frying pan into the fire often works. You want to let God move you. Same way with leaving a church. Never leave a church just for negativity. Leave a church for something better. And that requires judgment and a lot of other things. And there is a time to leave a church, so I'm not denying that. I wanted to read you a few lines from a book by George MacDonald. And this is a trilogy called The Curate's Awakening. And this is the volume called The Curate of Glaston. And it's a chapter headed Divine Service. Divine Service. And it's not a Rip Snorton novel. They're not going to make movies of George MacDonald novels by and large. There's some that would do better than others. But he's a didactic writer with wonderful insights that kept him in constant trouble. And but he had wonderful things to say that actually disqualified him to serve as a minister in the normal setting. And he's talking in chapter 24 here called Divine Service about what that is. The name of this volume is The Curate of Glaston, Glaston. and it's chapter 24, and it's simply titled Divine VI Service. So what is divine service? And going from where I just was, you will know what's coming, I'm sure. When I use the phrase divine service, explained Paul Rath, I mean nothing whatever about the church or its observance. I mean simply serving God. Shall I make the church a temple of idolatrous worship by supposing that it exists for the sake of supplying some need that God has, or of gratifying some taste in Him, that I there listen to His word, say prayers to Him, and sing His praises for His benefit? Shall I degrade the sanctity of the closet, hallowed by the words of Jesus, by shutting myself up behind its door in the vain fancy of doing something there that God requires of me as a sacred observance? Shall I foolishly imagine that to exercise the highest, loveliest privilege of my existence, that of pouring forth my whole heart in prayer into the heart of Him who is accountable for me, who has glorified me with His own image, and call that serving God? But, interjected Drew, is not God pleased that a man should pour out his soul to Him? Yes, indeed, doubtless. But is the child who sits by his father's knee, looks up into his father's eye, serving that father, because the heart of the father delights to look down upon the child? And shall the moment of my deepest repose, the moment where I serve myself with the life of the universe, be called serving God? What would you think of a child who said, I am very useful to my father, for when I ask him for something or tell him I love him, it gives him such pleasure? No. Well, I'd better just keep going here. When my child would serve me, he sees some need I have, jumps from his seat at my knee, finds that what will meet my need, and is my eager, happy servant. He has done something for his father. His seat by my knee is love, delight, well-being, peace, not service, however pleasing in my eyes. Do not talk of public worship as divine service. Search the prophets and you will find observances, fasts and sacrifices and solemn feasts of the temple were regarded by God's holy men with loathing and scorn just because by the people they were regarded as divine service. But, Mr. Drew replied, I can't help thinking that if the phrase ever was used in that sense, there's no meaning of that kind attached to it now. Service stands merely for the forms of public worship. The reply, if there were no such thing as divine service in the true sense of the word, then it would scarcely be worthwhile to quarrel with its misapplication. But I believe that true and genuine service may be given to the living God, and for the development of the divine nature in man, it is necessary that he should do something for God. And it is not hard to discover how, for God is in every creature and in their needs. Therefore, Jesus says that whatever is done to one of the little ones is done for him. And if the soul of a believer be the temple of the Spirit, then is not the place of that man's labor, his shop, his bank, his laboratory, his school, his factory, the temple of Jesus Christ, where the Spirit of the man is at work. Mr. Drew, your shop is the temple of your service, where the Lord Christ ought to be throned. Your counter ought to be his altar, and everything laid on it with intent of doing as you can for your neighbor in the name of Jesus Christ. I'll leave this here if you want to look at it. Now, in connection with that, you want to be sure to look at the very last section in Calvin's book, which is on page 92 through 94. Be faithful to your divine calling, because the views which MacDonald is expressing are actually the views of the Reformation. Luther's always talking about the plowboy and the milkmaid, and how they are serving God in holy orders. You know about the priesthood of the believer? Today, I think most people suppose that means that anyone can do what the priests do. They can do holy services. That's not what the priesthood of the believer meant for Luther. The priesthood of the believer in Luther means that at your labor, whatever it is, you are a priest. And Calvin picks up on that same thing. It's not unknown in other writers, but it was a prominent part of the Reformation teaching and of the theology that formed America in its earliest days. And the Puritans had remarkable teachings about your vocation as divine calling. Now, I must move on to other things, but the important point that I'm trying to make here is simply that if you're going to be a disciple, you can't omit your work. See, your work, where you are, that is the place of discipleship. Any comments or questions just about that? Yes, sir.
So I guess I'm wondering, in the context of the means and the spiritual disciplines and the primary place being your work, would that practically play out that you would exercise spiritual disciplines while at work, or the work is...
Indeed. And the way that would work is that you would find ways in which what you do are a discipline, are disciplines. For example, we will go over the list here in a moment. One discipline for the spiritual life is service. And we'll see how that works. Another one is submission. And we'll see how that works. And the list isn't complete. So how can one use what one does anyway? And now that's where you need the concept. What is a discipline? It's something in your power that you do to enable yourself to do what you can't do by direct effort. I'm hoping that if someone wakes you up at 2:30 in the morning and says, "What is a discipline?" you would rattle that off. Right? That's the concept. And there is no closed list. And each of us in our peculiar places need to learn how. Now, we'll still need the times of solitude and so on, of worship, fellowship, and so on. And sometimes that can be done at work. I want to talk to you more about solitude and silence in a moment. And one of the great things about solitude is you can practice it and learn it so that it becomes your constant presence. That you are in solitude wherever you go because of where you stand before God. And that's one of the important outcomes. But there are ways that this is to be done at work. Any other comments or questions? Yes, sir?
Just that I wish that I had heard more teaching on this earlier in my career. I always tried to do my work with integrity and honesty, but it was only in the later years of my career that I began asking Jesus, if you were me, how would you write this report or proposal?
Right. That's right. That's That's where we want to be. And then we learn the things that will help us be available to Him and to others. And it gives a holy calling on every vocation. Now, if you despise your vocation or your job, and you think this couldn't possibly be a holy calling, that itself, then you need to do some reworking of the kingdom. And of course, I don't know if there are various kinds of jobs that probably shouldn't be done. But there again, my advice, unless it's openly criminal or immoral, I think if you're in the Cosa Nostra, that would be hard to do, or a bank robber. But in most occupations, if you feel like it is not glorifying to God, well, then find a way to do it until God moves you out. Yes.
I've been a homemaker for many, many years before I went back to school at Denver Seminary. And when you stay home, you get a lot of like phone calls from solicitors and stuff. And you know, most people hate those calls and
Yep.
they don't answer. But I one time I just thought, well, I'll answer it. And I prayed for it. I knew it was a sales call, and they were wanting, you know, to consolidate your debt. And I just said, you know, praise the Lord, we don't have any debt, but is there anything I can pray for you? And he just like, whoa. I make like 50 calls a day, and I've never had anybody ask me that.
You did a wonderful thing, my dear. You did a wonderful
And so I
thing.
did end up praying for him over the phone, and that was just really profound to me, thinking I can even be Jesus to a sales call over the phone. So it was really profound to me.
Now suppose you're on the other end and you have the job. And then you ask yourself, could Jesus do this? Now don't move too fast. Well, again, if it's not illegal or immoral, he could do it. Yeah. Yes, sir?
It seems that the natural byproduct of leading disciples toward this type of discipleship would then be that the healthy step would be that we see social transformation. And can you speak to just the fact that we...
Man, you said it. Ain't nothing more to say.
Well, there's a new move of raising social issues.
Yeah, now you're getting into criticism. Good for you, right? Because what you're actually...
We're skipping a pretty vital step, right? I mean, getting our congregation to go feed the poor for a weekend, but that's it. Whereas this would probably sustain a bit more.
Actually, it might have some effect on the poor. Might actually have some effect on the poor. And maybe thousands upon thousands of people who don't ever do anything for the poor might actually start affecting it. Maybe without knowing what they're doing, but they're changing what they do at what they do.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to make a remark about something that is very complicated. I've been doing that anyway, and I can't tell you all the things I don't mean by what I say. One of the greatest sources of poverty in this country is miseducation. Most of those people who are poor go through some school. And they are not enabled by that experience. They're not. And they are not enabled by that experience because of the way the system is set up by the people who are in the system. Now, the reason why I apologize before I start talking about it is because it is so complicated. And some of the very best people and Christians I know are trying to do something in that system. And they always do wonders for the children that they work with. But they're grinding against a system where most of it is absolutely harmful to the kids. And one dimension of that is secularism. Secularism is an absolute personal dead end, and a social one as well. You know, I mean, whoopee, I'm secular. What comes next? Well, you're proud, you're secular. What does that do for your life? What does that do in terms of hope and peace? And I'll tell you, it does absolutely nothing. And so these little children who need hope and peace and love, they don't get it. And they decide, who needs this? I'll sell drugs on the street. I'll sell my body on the street. I'll make money. I'll so forth and so on. Thank you, my brother. That's the key. Now, we are going through a period where a lot of folks have discovered the poor, and others have discovered trees and owls. And they're turning green. Now, all of those things need to be attended to. They are vital. And you go back to Genesis 1:26, which, folks, that's the key verse of the Bible, 1:26 Genesis, not John 3:16. You can't understand John 3:16 unless you understand Genesis 1:26. And that's the whole story. Why are the rainforests being systematically destructed? What's back of it? Human need. The people who go in and cut down the trees and run the monkeys off are not the fat cats that are making the money. It's poor people who have somehow got to find some way to feed themselves and their families. And they're the ones who have to go in and do it. Now, who's going to deal with that? You're not going to deal with that by protesting or passing laws up here or something of that sort. You have to think in different ways about, and you have to think, as we say, ecologically. That is to say, you have to think in terms of the whole thing and understand why those people down there have to do what they do and occasionally go in and kill off a few Indians. The story of Jesus' crucifixion is so touching when you look at the details. There's one passage where it talks about how the servants came by and slapped him. The people who are always the slappies found someone they could slap. And it was Jesus. Now, that is a reflection of what goes on every day on earth. Every day. And who is responsible for it? For the most part, a very select group of people who establish and maintain the system that produces something like that. So you need to have a gospel for the up and in. Okay, enough. William James. Will James. They used to say that the mark of an educated person was that they knew the James brothers were not Frank and Jesse. They were William and Henry. That's not quite right. A lot of people who know it's William and Henry aren't educated. Now, I'd like to just quickly go through a number of passages and then a little comment on it. But you remember I said yesterday that when you think in terms of getting a hold of that system, you know, with all the circles, that the primary things you want to get a hold of are the body and the mind. That's the place you get a hold of it. And there are systematic ways in which these interact. But we talked about the body last time. And now I want to talk about thought. Because the discussion of will, if you've had a chance to look at it, you know it really turns out to be a discussion of thought or ideas. And it is so important to understand how the will works off of thoughts. So I want to just point out a few passages, make sure that you have put down a mark by them. And on page 415, the first one, this is the italicized section at the bottom of 415, a supply of ideas of the various movements that are possible, left in the memory by experiences of their involuntary performance, is the first prerequisite of the voluntary life. Now, what he's saying is that in order to act, you have to have an idea of the action. You have to have an idea of the action. And there's a certain obvious point about this, but see, he's building up to his main conclusion about how the will works. So obviously, what he's saying here is, for example, a baby doesn't really have very much of a will. Probably nothing to speak of to begin. And why do they not? Well, he's saying they have not had enough time to build up a repertoire of ideas, of actions to guide their impulses in such a way that they would actually be able to act. So now, his view is that for action to occur, the will has to have a direction, and it can't have a direction unless it has an idea, which would include sensations, feelings, all sorts of things. He's not using idea in a very precise way. So jump to 418 and look at his illustration. This is about 8 lines down on page 418. You see where he says, if I will to write Peter rather than Paul, it is the thought of certain digital hand-finger sensations, of certain alphabetic sounds, of certain appearances on the paper, and of no others, which immediately precedes the motion of my pen. What brings the action about? He said, well, there's a set of images and sensations and so on. And if I utter the word Paul rather than Peter, it is the thought of my voice falling on my ear and certain muscular feelings in my tongue, lips, and larynx which guide the utterance. Now, people normally do not think that. People normally think there has to intervene an act of a certain kind between the image and the act. That is what he calls the fiat. And his view is that in some cases there is a fiat, but in most cases the action goes directly from the ideas to the action. The fiat is a peculiar case where there is some kind of tension, and this is discussed on down 41, about the middle, you have a paragraph. There is indeed the fiat, the element of consent or resolve that the act shall ensue. And this is, as he says, this constitutes the essence of the voluntariness of the act. Now, his view is that in most cases, you don't act voluntarily. In picking up your pen to write someone, there may be nothing at all of a choice. The action flows directly from the idea. In some cases, this will be the case of deliberation, there will be an act, and that's going to be for him the releasing of contrary images. So if you have an image of writing to Peter, and there's a ring of the doorbell, then you may wonder, shall I ignore that and go ahead and write, or shall I go to the door? In that case, there will be a fiat, or a decision, as he refers to it. But that is for him not the customary case. In the customary case, you go directly from the idea to the act. Now, I'm hoping that already you can begin to see how this applies to the case of discipline, but let's go on. Page 421. You see the heading there, idiomotor action. Idiomotor is a phrase he uses to refer to this structure where you go directly from the idea to the action. Idiomotor. And in the middle of the page, the italicized section, he asks, is the bare idea of a movement's sensible effects its sufficient motor cue, or must there be an additional mental antecedent in the shape of a fiat, decision, consent, volitional mandate, or other synonymous phenomena of consciousness before the movement can follow? And his answer is no. Now, I'm not trying to defend this, I'm just trying to give you something to think with here as we get back to our topic. And I think that actually he's right. And that most of what we would call free action, because no one is keeping us from doing it or something, is actually a direct response to the ideas that we have accepted. A nice illustration, if it works, on the top of 422. Whilst talking, I become conscious of a pen on the floor or of some dust on my sleeve. Without interrupting the conversation, I brush away the dust or pick up the pen. I make no express resolve, but the mere perception of the object and the fleeting notion of the act seem of themselves to bring the act about. Now, if you're trying to come to grips with this, this is a good thing to look at. And you think of how you do that. I mean, if you're talking to someone, you see a pen on the floor, do you decide to pick up the pen? If you see dandruff on your shoulder, do you have a deliberating process, or do you just, you know? Now, you can test what he's saying by your experience. And that's what you need to do. Now, his point is, I've already made it, that in most cases at least, you go directly from the idea to the action. So what's going to be really important, isn't it, is what idea you have. Most of life is filled with trivialities like pin on the floor, dandruff on your shoulder. But those trivialities are what illustrate his point. So now, the bottom of that same page, 422, in all this, the determining condition of the unhesitating and resistless sequence of the act seems to be the absence of any conflicting notion in the mind. If other ideas show up with the same degree of prominence, then you will have a conflict. And suppose you're about to reach down and pick up the pen, and you suddenly have the thought that some dignified person is addressing you. Then you will have another idea, and you may, and not pick up the pen, right? But if you do have a conflicting notion of mind, then you have a problem with proceeding with the act. And I'm trying to hold off applying this to what we're mainly interested in, but it's very hard because you can see immediately how this comes into discipline, right? And the issues of temptation and so on. But their inhibitory ideas change the situation. On page 424 now, the middle of the page there, the italicized section, we may then lay it down for certain that every representation of a movement awakens in some degree the actual movement which is its object, and awakens it in a maximum degree whenever it is not kept from doing so by an antagonistic representation present simultaneously to the mind. Okay. Now, if there is an antagonistic representation, then you have to reach what we might call a decision. You don't normally reach decisions. Now, I've talked on this before about, for example, driving a car. You don't want to be riding with the person who has to make a decision about turning the wheel and getting the brakes and all that sort of thing, checking their rear view mirror and so on. You want to be riding with someone who does not, in James's language, have conflicting notions like they are twittering. That certainly causes problems, doesn't it? Now, can you use that as an illustration of how, where there ought not to be any hesitation, you have another thing, and there is hesitation, and you wind up running into somebody? Yes, sir?
Well, there's also a problem in that, like taking the driving example, I have a standard transmission vehicle, and I was driving my parents' car, which is automatic, and went to change gears and slammed.
No, that's not good. No, but see, that does just illustrate the case here. In this case, you needed an intervening idea. And I'm glad you said that, because that's, of course, why I'm asking you to read this, is I want you to see how that works and how it fits into disciplines. Thank you. That's a good illustration. The essence of James's view here is that you do not have ideas that do not have impulses associated with them. And actually, for those of you with philosophical interests, this is the basis of American pragmatism. It's the interpretation of ideas. It doesn't imply pragmatism, but it's one of the things that it's based upon. And I think that it's fundamentally right, and that's one reason why I and a lot of other people smarter than me put emotions and ideas in the same place in the mind. And the idea that there are just ideas that don't have any impulses associated with them is a mistake. And actually, I think it is a part of a strategy to blind people to the consequences of their ideas. So just to nail that down, on page 425, you see the italicized section there. Movement is the natural, immediate effect of the process of feeling. By that he means a sensation, which includes emotions, irrespective of what the quality of the feeling may be. It is so in reflex action, it is so in emotional expression, it is so in voluntary life. Idiomotor action is thus no paradox to be softened or explained away. It obeys the type of all conscious action. From it, one must start to explain the sort of action in which a special fiat is involved. And now you know, I trust that the fiat deal comes up when you have got different ideas and therefore different impulses. And that's what you get on page 426 under the heading of action after deliberation. The deliberation is essentially a matter of moving back and forth between two or more different ideas. And then the fiat is what gets you out of that. And really the only thing we have left to do much here is to figure out what the fiat is and how the fiat works. And this is going to bring out some rather deep and difficult issues, but I think we can deal with them successfully for our purposes. Another comment on that last vein is at the top of 432, where he says, when I said a while back that consciousness is in the very nature impulsive, I should have added the proviso that it must be sufficiently intense in order to elicit action. But his point is it's there when it doesn't elicit action. And then he has a nice discussion here about how it shows up in little ways, even in bodily conditions, muscle twitching and body language, even if it doesn't lead to an action. It's still there, and actually that's a very important kind of thing to learn. Yes, sir?
This is all a matter of degree. It seems like there are some people who spend a great deal of time deliberating everything, even very small decisions. And it seems like maybe there's just one important idea that might be missing.
Well, that gets into what he's calling here healthiness and unhealthiness of will. And such things, for example, as inability to respond to ideas, sometimes because they are stronger than they should be or weaker than they should be, and so on. So he's not going to say that it's all okay. There are conditions of the will. I take it that's what you're referring to. And he tries to understand that in terms of how the ideas are acting in the person. And it's a very important point because, for example, a person who has a compulsive problem, did I lock the door? And so on. That's an idea problem for him, but it comes out as an unhealthiness of will. It's not just did I? Or it's not just a problem of forgetting. Because very often the person will actually remember that he did lock the door and still go check it. That's the sort of thing he's referring to. Yes, sir?
I'm trying to think about it pastorally or mentoring someone. At some level, moving someone from automatic disobedience to deliberation is a point of where you can really connect that.
Great.
And then moving them,
Good.
yeah.
Yes, that's it. And of course, you want to understand again, when you preach and teach, you are doing idea work. And a lot of that is the care that you put into it to make sure the hearer gets the idea. So again, this is a dimension of the human side of holiness. And if we aren't careful, we'll just try to tell a jerking story and hope the Holy Spirit will hit him. And it does happen. But is that a modus operandi for a pastor? Or a parent, for that matter? Yes, someone over here? Yes.
When I hear this, consciousness in its very nature is impulsive, is it that he should have added the proviso that it's sufficiently intense? It
Well, but
raises-
no, don't forget what you're saying, but I want to step in there. Okay. The sufficient intensity is only with reference to bringing about action.
Right,
And he wants to say that it's impulsive even if it doesn't bring about action.
okay.
That it has effects, and so on. His view is an idea as such is impulsive, no matter whether it breaks into action. Now, if I haven't thrown you totally off, please finish.
Well, I'm not sure now if it fits, but what it's raising in my mind is, you often hear the question, was, did Jesus actually experience temptation?
Mhm.
Did God have sin?
Mm-hmm.
And my thought has always been, it's a true temptation, but his consciousness of the presence of
Yeah.
the Father was so intense
Well,
that it totally, the fiat
Yeah.
that he came to dismissed the other
well,
concept. And so wouldn't our job be to bring people into a consciousness of God's presence?
you have brought us something very important. Now, I have to go back and talk about temptation. This is so important. And I want to do that after going through our list here a little bit more. But what we want to do is to help people not get into temptation. And now I'm going to raise one question about James here in a moment. But that is so very important. Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. You don't want to be in temptation. Now, when you're in temptation, it's not the same for everyone. Jesus was never tempted to find a bottle of Jack Daniels like a confirmed alcoholic is. He was never tempted to engage in illicit sex in the way that many people are. So, again, I'm coming back to that, all right? Because we want to distinguish some stages here that will help us think about it. Okay, let me finish this up quickly. Right at the bottom of 444, please. What holds attention determines action. You see that heading, the bottom there? If one must have a single name for the condition upon which the impulsive and inhibitive quality of objects depends, one had better call it their interest. The interesting is a title which covers not only the pleasant and the painful, but also the morbidly fascinating, and that goes back to your point on the back row there about the will that is messed up. The morbidly fascinating, the tediously haunting, you hear some jingle. It's a small, small world. Now you'll have that the rest of the day.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, glad to help you out. Even the simply habitual, inasmuch as the attention usually travels on habitual lines, and what we attend to and what interests us are synonymous terms. It seems as if we ought to look for the secret of an idea's impulsiveness not in any particular relations which it may have to the paths of motor discharge, for all ideas have that, but rather in a preliminary phenomena, the urgency, namely, with which it is able to compel attention and dominate our consciousness. And I'm talking about the human side of holiness now, right? But you see, when you read that, immediately I'm sure it comes to your mind, well, that's where the Holy Spirit comes in, isn't it? Or the power of the Word.
Dr. Miller,
Yes?
would that include as a man or woman thinketh? So is he in this, what holds attention?
That is a proverbial way of expressing the thing here which James is trying to give a more sophisticated treatment to. But of course it comes, the source of that is of course the proverb. And the full proverb says, when you go to dinner with the king, I think, put a knife to your throat. Because he may be saying, eat, eat. And then, but as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Right? I mean, he may not be wanting you to eat. So, little complication there. But then Allen wrote the famous piece, As a Man Thinketh. This, by the way, is one of the places where New World or New Age stuff starts coming together with genuine spiritual formation principles. Okay. Bottom of 445, the last paragraph there, the italicized line, will is a relation between the mind and its ideas. Now this is where you want to start being careful with him, okay? I don't think you can make this work out, and I shall say why here in a moment, but it's a very important truth that whatever you finally make out of will, it's the idea that runs the show. And then we have to say in a moment something about how does that work. Bottom of 446, italicized. James is a good writer in that if you just read everything he italicizes, you'll get it. That's the Cliff Notes version. The essential achievement of the will, in short, when it is most voluntary, is to attend to a difficult object and hold it fast before the mind. The so doing is the fiat. So now he's talking as if the fiat is how you hold the idea. Effort of attention, last line on the page, effort of attention is thus the essential phenomenon of will. And let me say that I think he is right about that. I think he's right about that. But then you have to deal with how you manage that. Down about 10 lines on 447. The difficulty is mental. It is that of getting the idea of the wise action to stay before our mind at all. When any strong emotional state whatever is upon us, the tendency is for no images but such as are congruous with it to come up. If others by chance offer themselves, they are instantly smothered and crowded out. If we be joyous, we cannot keep thinking of those uncertainties and risks of failure which abound upon our path. If lugubrious, we cannot think of new triumphs, travels, loves, and joys, nor vengeful of our oppressor's community of nature with ourselves. The cooling advice we get from others when the fever fit is on us is the most jarring and exasperating thing in life. And he's so good the way he puts things. Well, I must finish this. So just one more thing here, maybe two. 449. The whole drama is a mental drama. The whole difficulty is a mental difficulty. A difficulty with an ideal object of our thought. It is, in one word, an idea to which our will applies itself, an idea which, if we let it go, would slip away, but which we cannot let go. Consent to the idea's undivided presence. This is effort's sole achievement. That's on page 449. And that just entirely gives you what I want you to get for the purposes of discipline. And the rest of it is just illustration. The nice summary on 451. To sum it all up. So please mark that for your attention, but I can't take more time right now. And then he applies this to ethics on page 454 and following. But I'm going to leave that to you, because obviously what he says has tremendous implications for doing the right thing, doing what we ought, and so on. Now it's time to take a little break. Please come back as quickly as you can, and we will move on from here.